Hello there YouTube, this is Troy and welcome back to the channel The Lonely Wolf. This is my second video in my appreciation of art and pop culture. In this rather spooky edition, let's delve into the world of horror films. In this episode I'd like to talk about some of the overused stereotypes that caused the horror genre to lose its momentum, but how the influence of Asian cinema created a resurgence in supernatural horror and got itself back on track towards a revival of horror genre that is still scaring us to this very year. We have much to talk about YouTube, so I invite you into my imagination as we discuss psychology of good horror, as well as the techniques that make films work. As a child of the 80s and 90s, I watched horror films from a very early age, from Freddy Krueger all the way to Jason and Michael. Although I enjoyed this genre, it started fizzling out in the 90s. The stereotypes or tropes that were used were becoming predictable and derivative. For example, the first one to show her boobs was the first one to die, or the couple who had sex in the car would be the next victim of the Slayer. And predictably, the pure virginal one would be the one to save the day. What may have frightened me in my childhood no longer made me fearful. By the mid-90s or the late 90s, we were living in an era where we were no longer scared. I may have watched some of the slasher flicks for a bit of light entertainment and a few laughs, but that's about it. But then in the 2000s, something really interesting happened. I entered a cinema in 2002, and at that point, I walked out and I realised that I was scared again. The film release of The Ring was the one for me. It was the start of a new wave of horror. For those who need a refresher course, the film centres around the urban legend of a videotape that kills you 7 days after you watch it. After you've watched the disturbing videotape, you receive a phone call informing you that you have 7 days to live. Journalist and mother Rachel Keller stumbles across the videotape and watches it. The scenes that appear in the video are a mismatch of real and abstract image. The tape itself is a horror movie within itself and was rather unsettling to watch. Especially the woman in the mirror. She's looking at the viewing audience with a look that she's seeing right through you. What stood out about this film was the strong and intelligent characters. Rachel and her estranged boyfriend Noah are very resourceful at researching, digging up and deciphering clues that lead to the origins of the videotape. This made the characters much more relatable, and the more investment we have in the characters, the bigger the perceived threat is for the audience. The emotional stakes run even higher when their son inadvertently watches the videotape. Rachel and Noah cleverly pool their resources together to seemingly solve the mystery. All they had to do was climb down the dark, watery well and retrieve the remains of Samara Morgan, a girl who was murdered and her body disposed of, and her spirit would be laid to rest. Rachel's 7-day deadline was over, and she realized that she was safe, and the vengeful spirit of Samara that used the psychic energy to create the cursed videotape was finally at peace. But it wasn't as it seemed, and a shocking twist, the intentions of this spirit was much more sinister. Noah is alone in his room, and what unfolds next goes down in horror movie is one of my favourite scenes. His TV magically turns itself on with psychic power. Samara, with her hair covering her face, climbs out of the well, walks closer to the TV, crawls through the TV, and Noah is dead. So the only way to avoid death in this fictional universe is to make a copy of the film and spread it, almost like spreading a virus. What was most uncomfortable about this scene to me was not being able to see the spirit's face, which was completely covered by long black hair. To me, this simplicity in design was much more unsettling than any ghoulish CGI created image from competing horror films. Interestingly, this type of spirit has its origins in Japanese horror mythology. The Ring is based off a Japanese horror movie of the same title, based on a series of novels by author Koji Suzuki. According to Japanese mythology, a girl or woman who dies in violent, horrific circumstances is often transformed in the spiritual realm into a relentlessly destructive spirit that will destroy anything in its path. In this mythology, water is perceived to be a very powerful psychic medium, thus the use of a well as a scene for the origins of the creation of the curse tape. Japanese horror mythology also came to Hollywood in the form of The Grudge, originally a Japanese horror film under the name Ju-on. This was another unsettling film that presented us with images that the Western eye wasn't yet accustomed to. We now have a lot to talk about YouTube, so let's delve into the psychology of horror filmmaking. I once walked out of a jump scare movie and asked myself many questions. What was I doing watching something that was making me unsettled or unpleasant? I thought perhaps my fetish for those films was part of a deep-rooted self-mutilation. But after thinking about it for a little while, I like to compare horror films to amusement park adrenaline rushes that we get from a plunging roller coaster. The main difference is that this adrenaline rush is not being released in seconds, but over a sustained 2-hour period. Perhaps the unfamiliar is what scares us as well. The cursed videotape from the ring and the hiding of the woman's face with the long black hair creates a sense of uncertainty. The use of new camera techniques also creates a sense of unease. The third installment of Paranormal Activity presented a new type of filming technique to capture the presence of a demonic spirit. A camera is mounted onto a rotating fan, and the audience watches as the view of the room follows the arc of the rotating camera. Having never seen a technique like this before, the unfamiliar is what was scaring me the most. Following each arc getting panned across the screen created a sense of unease, as the audience nervously waited for what would lie at the end of the arc, or how the scene would change from one rotation to the next. The better quality horror films that are of this generation are generally based around characters that are more intelligent, relatable, and who have complex family interactions. This sense of intimacy with the audience gives us a vicarious experience, and we share the fear of our fictional characters a lot more deeply. Being intimate with the characters is one explanation, but being intimate with the house, the haunting site, its geography, the floor plan, gives us a further sense of intimacy that has us a lot more engaged. The Conjuring 2 exemplifies this aspect of filmmaking. It's an example of a film that familiarizes us with the long hallways of the house and the genuinely authentic 70s decor of that era. The juxtaposition of two opposing ideas or images is also a recurring theme in my appreciation of horror films. I've noticed that when two competing ideas that should belong in separate realms are put together so closely on one canvas, creates a polarizing effect. It's either fascination or revulsion, but nothing in between. I'll discuss this observed phenomenon in many of my arts videos. The use of quietness is also a very effective tool. Over the years, we've become used to searing, overbearing soundtracks to accompany tension scenes. What we're really not used to is the absolute silence, which was used very effectively in the Paranormal Activity installments. So let's transport ourselves to 2016. The Conjuring 2 not only succeeded for me as a sequel, but a film that stood out for me as a standout horror achievement in its own right. Based on the files of Ed and Lorraine Warren and their investigation into the Enfield haunting in England, this movie delivered for me some of the best jump scares. Valak, a demonic entity that takes the form of a nun to haunt Lorraine Warren, is an example of juxtaposition that I've spoken of. A nun is thought of as a symbol of Catholic faith, a safety and a direct opposition to evil in the religious world. A nun and a demon could not be any further apart on any spectrum, so superimposing the two of them on the same canvas could be some explanation to the unease that this presence created. Interestingly enough, the Valak that's researched in demonology textbooks has been known to take the form of a winged angel riding on the back of a two-headed dragon, taking up the job of one of the presidents of hell. Valak appeared as a nun to Lorraine Warren to mock her Catholic faith. This mind game created an interesting psychological reaction. The Conjuring 2 for me captures all the elements of psychology that I've listed in previous points in this video. We have intelligent characters, we have close family interactions, the geography of the house is really laid out well, and the execution of the jump scenes were outstanding. So that's my take on the horror movie genre. So in my next arts and pop culture video, I'd like to take you through some of the weird and twisted YouTube viral videos and what kind of art I perceive in those. Until then, I'll see you later, YouTube. Have a great day.